Today at Solus Partners, we are proud to present Damon with Weinstein and Klein. Damon, can you tell us a little bit about your firm and general practice? I understand you work with a lot of different business owners through a variety of transactions, but maybe it would just be helpful to understand kind of the general overview and what the day-to-day looks like.
Sure thing, sure thing. And thank you for having me on. So I'll keep it high level, that way you could go deeper if needed. But about 7 years ago, I founded Weinstein Klein with my business partner, Brian. Just the two of us. We're up to about 19 or so people right now, including lawyers and support staff. And we're based out of Morristown, New Jersey. And we really work as fractional general counsel to small, mid-sized business owners. Most of our clients have below about 100, 120 or so employees, or about 25 million in revenue or below. And we really provide kind of three main practice areas: the corporate transaction group that does a lot of outside general counsel work, contracts, business advisory, mergers and acquisitions on both the buy side and sell side. Then there's a labor and employment group that does a lot of compliance counseling, conversations with business owners, HR, in-house, managing their employees, their staff, things like that, as well as defense litigation when something goes wrong and there's an employee suit against the employer. Will represent the employer in that case. And then the third practice area kind of stems from that last part, which is just general commercial litigation, contract disputes, IP disputes, things like that. And it's a fun practice. Most of our clients really, like I said, are in that small, mid-sized business range. They need a lawyer. They don't need a lawyer in-house. They don't need a lawyer every day, and they probably don't even need a lawyer every week, but they need a lawyer to look at their contracts, answer their questions about their people, explore potential opportunities for expansion or mergers and acquisitions. And they need an accessible law firm that's not one of the bigger shops and not a solo firm that kind of just does one thing, and we kind of fit right nicely in that wheelhouse, in that market right there.
Fascinating. I mean, from just your general background, having working directly with a lot of small business owners, what has it been like in your shoes? I mean, having grown the practice to a pretty notable size, and I imagine that's a journey in of itself. What's that like?
Yeah, a lot of ups and downs, and there are both. Don't let anyone fool you otherwise. But it's, yeah, the journey itself has been great. Obviously, I mentioned my partner Brian Klein. I've known him since college, so there's an element of trust there, which I think is really important in a business partnership, whether it's a true partnership like him and I are, or whether it's an informal partnership or relationship that you have with someone as you're going through the process, the entrepreneurial process. It's huge to have someone that you can trust, and that even if you disagree, and you might strongly disagree at times on things, it's really nice to know that you have someone that you can say confidently they have your best interests in heart, right? They might have a different thought, a different approach, and like I said, think you're wrong or think you're an idiot sometimes, and that's perfectly fine. That's what a business partnership should be about. But it all comes back to just communicating and making sure we're driving kind of in that same direction. So it's been a journey, to answer your question. It's a fun one for sure. What I like about it, to kind of bring it back to the practice, is a lot of our clients have issues, growth issues, scaling issues, expansion issues that we can relate to. And half of the time we're on a call with the client, especially kind of that business counseling, even the labor and employment to a certain extent, because we have employees ourselves, half of the conversation is with the client about the legal approach, the legal things to think about, consider, and strategy. And then the other half, we kind of take off that lawyer hat and we're just speaking to them owner to owner, entrepreneur to entrepreneur, and maybe not giving advice, but maybe just kind of asking some questions and just spitballing and brainstorming a little bit. And so we're able to kind of relate to a lot of clients, almost sit side by side with them, shoulder to shoulder, for a lot of those growth moments and those pain moments where they're trying to do something because we are either in it, we're about to be in it, or we've been we've been through it before, and we can kind of experience, share, and speak to them as a human and advisor, not just a true lawyer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that relatability is a big factor, and it makes sense that it just inherently fosters a better relationship directly with your clients.
You could relate to that, right? They have to fire an employee who is perhaps a good performer, but is just not getting along well and is kind of toxic in the workplace, right? We've had other clients who've experienced that, and we've experienced that, right? They aren't sure if they should hire first and then find the work, or find the work and then hire, and we could relate to that. We've been through the exact thing, so we can kind of give them, half legal advice and half practical advice for whatever that second half is worth, because it's only our experience.
Sure. I guess, what are some of the more common challenges or just general points that bring someone like a potential client into your practice? I know it's a variety of business things, but are there commonalities?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we are intentional. It's very much by design that we focus on the market of that small mid-sized business client, and that we focus on labor and employment and corporate transactional. 90%, if you're in the small mid-sized business space, I'm not talking about the JP Morgans of the world, but the other companies, right, so to speak, more Main Street than Wall Street. Your 90% of your legal issues and your headaches come from your people, whether they're vendors, clients, employees, whatever they may be, or your contracts or lack thereof, right? There's lack of clarity, who's doing what rights do I have, what rights does that person have? So those are the common issues, right? Really in those two spaces. And that's very much by design that we've kind of created the practice groups to address those head on, because it's, if you are one of those clients, the vast majority of your legal issues fall into really those two buckets. Obviously, there's more to it than just that, but it's, those types of things I think are more common. The labor and employment is really the obvious one, right? I mean, everyone, you hear it all, right? And every podcast we all listen to, every conversation we're having with other entrepreneurs and business owners and people trying to scale, there's the war for talent. It's really hard to find good people, and it's hard to hold on to good people. Then you want to reward the really good performers. You want to figure out what to do with the poor performers, whether it's get them out of the organization or find something to improve their performance. Once again, those are, that happens every single day, all day, right? I know the labor and employment team is probably on a call with someone right now going through some issues that are related to that. So that keeps us very busy. And again, something that we can relate to as a business that's going from, 2 to about 18 or 19 and plans to continue growing.
It's awesome. Is it fair to say that the labor side of the practice is more steady relative to M&A?
Yes, yeah, it's spot on. Yeah, it's a really good insight. Also by design, right? The labor and employment is steady work, so to speak. I'm doing visuals here on camera, of course, and the M&A will ebb and flow, and that's the nature of it, right? And they feed off of each other, of course. If you represent a group of investors and they buy a business, after they buy the business, they might hire people. The labor and employment is able to come in and help them, vice versa. But labor and employment is steady, and I'll say we joined up, Brian and I, in June 2019. So as even though it feels like it was 2 days ago, it was a long time ago that COVID happened. And if people remember, COVID was obviously very much an international health crisis, but it was also really a labor and employment crisis. Employees didn't know what their rights were. Employers didn't know what their rights were. And nobody knew what a furlough was. Are you allowed to require your people to get vaccinated? Can you fire them if they don't? What if they have a condition? All of these things were in the wild, wild west. And so they kind of went quiet for a while because people were, quite frankly, terrified about what was going on in the markets, what was going on in the world. And so stuff was quiet. Even corporate work generally was quiet. And the labor and employment group just kind of skyrocketed at that moment. And it's really, honestly, it's stayed busy since, because COVID kind of created an opportunity for people to hire remotely, for employees to work remotely, and all these different things that have just really kept the labor and employment group busy consistently. So it's a spot on assessment of kind of the different flows of the two groups.
Sure. But I imagine there's probably a spurt of it, but maybe it's quiet down. Just looking at the pitch book data, it seems like the only deals that are getting done are the mega deals. So I'm curious to see how that's impacted your side.
Yeah, it's, I'll talk about the flip side to that. So, 2020, 21, maybe part of 22, if I remember correctly, were really quiet with the MA, right? There wasn't a lot of activity going on. Again, I think people were just terrified and waiting to kind of see how things were going to play out across the board. Since then, it's really accelerated. So it's interesting because we focus on what I call smaller size deals. Our typical M&A deal purchase price is about 15 million and under. And we have a lot of deals that are in the $1 to $2 to $3 million range. So again, not mega deals. The example I gave before, more Main Street than Wall Street. A lot of the people who are working on the Wall Street deals, they're a little nervous right now. There's not as much activity going on at that, although I think there's consensus it's picking up and going to pick up. But at where we are, and again, the smaller end, the 15 million and under deals, so to speak, it's only getting more and more active. I think last year we did about 22 transactions. The year before was about 15 or 16. We expect that to kind of increase. And I think that's a few things. I think there are just, probably the most important thing is, I think there's kind of this generational transition of business owners who are looking to get out, looking to retire. Perhaps they're fed up with owning their business after COVID and all these different things. Perhaps they plan to give it to their kids. Their kids don't have an interest in taking it over, or they wanted to give it to an employee or sell to an employee, and the employee isn't interested in taking it over for whatever reason. So we kind of fear about this silver tsunami of people who are going to retire from the workforce. Remember, that's a lot of people who own businesses as well. Typically, when you own a business, especially after however many years, you don't just close the doors and turn off the lights and say, well, it was a good run. You want to exit and make some money for it, fairly so, as you should. So there's a lot of activity in that space. And we know some other firms, our size, who are focusing on similar deals that we do. And everyone's busy and expects to get busier, which goes back to that war for talent and making it even more difficult than perhaps it otherwise would be.
Sure. I'd be curious, kind of shifting from the M&A to more back to the labor side. Have your clients seen an impact with AI as it relates to just jobs? I know that's a kind of a touchy and hot subject right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a funny, and this is probably not where you were going with that, but yes, but maybe not in the way you would have thought. And here's why. So we haven't seen a lot of clients downsizing as a result of AI
Mhm.
yet. And I say yet because it is going to happen, right? I think it's a fortunate or unfortunate reality of it, depending on how you kind of view it. But it is a reality nonetheless. We're already seeing it at some of the bigger shops, the mega firms and mega companies. What we have seen are some clients, and you might appreciate this because it's a different angle to your question, who are finding themselves in trouble because they're not going through their typical HR and legal avenues in order to figure out how to deal with certain employee issues, whether it is downsizing generally or just dealing with ongoing employee matters, and are relying on AI. And no surprise to anyone, AI is really good, like pretty damn good, but it's not perfect. And those things are creating issues. So I do think companies need to be mindful. And again, I know this is a self-serving statement coming from a lawyer who runs a law firm that part of what they do is labor and employment. But it's true for contracts. It's
Sure.
true for anything. We hear the horror stories every once in a while that somebody relied on AI and a completely hallucinated case law or precedent or whatever it is. We have seen that happen, and it's kind of okay, we're here to clean up the mess, but the mess shouldn't have existed in the first place.
Sure. I think that's a very insightful point there,
Yeah.
which granted we wouldn't see otherwise, but not having a legal perspective. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. But it is back to your main question though. I do think it's a reality that there will be, especially a lot of these entry level jobs, automated types of jobs, that I do think we're going to see some more layoffs and stuff like that. And I think it's the ebb and flow of technology in the workplace. It's a natural occurrence to a certain extent.
Sure. I'd also be interested, like, how are you and Brian thinking about AI? I mean, it seems like law is probably one of the harder industries where you can integrate it. There might be some points, but I'm just curious from
Yeah,
you guys' perspective, how does that relate or how does it resonate?
it's a great question, and here's why. I think there's a lot of, and I see it because I go online on social media at night and I'm scrolling and I see everyone chiming in saying, "Oh my, here are the top 10 jobs that are going to be eliminated due to AI." And I saw something the other day that said 12 to 18 months for lawyers. The next 12 to 18 months determine whether you're going to be in existence afterwards, or doing something else. Um, I see it, and I know Brian sees it, and this might just be, we are a younger, more entrepreneurial firm by nature. We see it as a really good opportunity, right? We see this as a way to improve our service offerings. We see this as a way to improve our efficiencies, add value to clients. We're able to do a lot more work, turn things around a lot quicker for them than we otherwise would have. We're using AI. We're using ChatGPT. We're using Claude. There's different, more proprietary software that we have that's specific for contract reviewing and negotiating and drafting. And we're able to use these different tools. And quite frankly, we can provide service at a level that, a bigger firm might have, 12 attorneys in a room looking at certain deal documents, for 2, 3 nights in a row. And we're able to do it in a single day with 2 or 3 lawyers and a paralegal with some good software and AI. So is it a little terrifying? Yes. I think anyone who tells you they're not scared of AI potentially taking our job or making us
Right.
obsolete human beings, I think is lying a little bit, but it's probably more exciting than it is terrifying. And we're leaning into it because I think the firms that adopt it now and early and really get used to it and figure out how to work with it instead of kind of work and just hope it doesn't really interfere with us. Those are the firms that I think will be in a better position in the future.
Sure. I'm curious, how do you
I'm
get
also just putting that out there into the universe just in case someone's listening and wants to keep that in mind in a few years when AI is everywhere.
right? Well, I mean, I think that we're a little ways away from that, and I think
I hope
everyone's
so.
going to always value another human being, kind of guiding them
Yeah.
from different kind of stressful moments. So I
Yeah.
think there's going to be need. I'm curious, how do you guys manage the data aspect? I know, especially in the legal profession, data and AI are sometimes a challenging
Oh yeah.
element to incorporate. How do you guys manage that or think through that?
Yeah. So we have some enterprise software that kind of, without knowing too much about tech, but from my understanding, maintains it within our firm database. That said, there's good practices, right? You don't take client information, names, identifying information. Obviously, if there's personal information or financial information, you try to scrub that as you can. But when you keep it in that ecosystem, I think it's okay. There's a lot of software out there, a lot of different providers. Then your lawyer and me wants to always make sure you read the terms and conditions, the terms of use, the privacy policies, things like that. And I encourage other people to do that as well. There are softwares and programs out there that I think are a bit more protective of what you put into them and what you upload and what you prompt it with than others. And you have to know what you're doing, right? Because at the end of the day, there's legal considerations, there's moral, there's ethical considerations. General, if you're a normal person, you want to be mindful of your privacy at the end of the day.
Sure. I think that's pragmatic.
Yeah.
I guess, and then as it relates to kind of your existing clients, how are you advising them when it comes to AI tools, especially when those kind of sticky messes come up? Like what are the general parameters or pieces of advice that you generally guide them with?
Two things. Everything you put into AI, every question you ask it, every scenario where you say, here's what I want to do. Can you figure out how to help me do this? All of that is potentially discoverable in litigation, right? So I think this is a big thing. If we have a client who says, I want to breach this contract by, terminating it now. I know that's a breach, but give me something I can make up to pretend that it's not a breach so I could threaten the other side with that and hopefully gain some leverage. If there's ever a breach of contract dispute, you better believe the other side's going to seek discovery on what this person put into ChatGPT. And when the person you're suing for breach, who says, no, I didn't breach, put into a prompt in ChatGPT or whatever it is, I want to do this. I know it's a breach. It's a pretty damning statement. That's obviously a pretty on the nose example. I'm sure it's happened and will happen to people that they prompt it that way. But we don't teach our clients or lecture our clients on what to say and not say in GPT, but we do remind them that discovery is a real thing in litigation, right? And years ago it was, let me see your text messages, your emails. Then it was, let's see your social media posts and messages on that. And now it's just turning into, what are you prompting into ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it is you're using. So we always start with that. And then the second we kind of hit on before, but it's a trust but verify. And so AI is great. And maybe, we've seen AI draft contracts that are B plus work, right? Good contracts, right? You don't need to, they're not C or D terms by any means, but they're also not A plus terms, right? And sometimes the difference between the B plus and the A plus is really what's going to make or break how protected you want that. So we've had a lot of clients where they say, well, we're going to run this through ChatGPT and test it to say, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And we'll encourage them to do that. And then we'll say, just please, whether it's us or something, we're not trying to be self-serving here entirely, run it by a lawyer. And it's okay if GPT takes the first draft, like crack at a first draft of a contract, but don't just say, okay, great, and then send it off to the other side. Just have a lawyer. Maybe they only need to spend an hour on it instead of 4 hours. That's great. But to have someone review it. We have found, just to round that out, AI right now is really good at drafting provisions for contracts. What it's not good at is issue spotting for what can go wrong in a contract and coming up with a solution, including drafted language, to address that specific issue. So it's a slight nuance to it, right? Hey, I want to sell you my car. It could put together a contract that will be pretty good in terms of me selling you my car. You're going to own the car afterwards. I'm going to get the money, but it's not going to address what happens if there is a defect, if there's a recall, if there is that. I'm just making something up. That those issues that are not addressed in there could become potential litigation landmines. And AI isn't just there yet to issue spot it, but lawyers who do contracts, lawyers who advise on these things That's what lawyers are trained to do, right? From back to the law school days, we're trained on how to issue spot, not necessarily to solve the problem, but what questions to ask and what things to probe so we can eventually solve the
I mean,
problem.
that sounds very insightful and just in general, something that, I mean, I'd not heard about discovery from AI
Yeah.
prompts. So I appreciate that insight
Yes.
in and of itself. It makes a ton of sense. So I can only
Yeah.
imagine the more stories of the history that you could see potentially there.
There will be some interesting cases and judicial decisions coming out in the next couple of years once these things work their way through the courts, and it'll be very interesting to see. I think that'll scare some people into how quickly and use how quickly we can get into AI and how useful it could be. But it'll be a good reminder of still remember at the end of the day, it's not perfect. It's awesome on a personal and professional level. I'm a big fan, but you have to understand its limitations across the board.
Well, I imagine then that just personal level of insight leads to some pretty long-standing relationships. How do most people find you today?
Yeah, it's really, it's word of mouth. We do a lot of networking, a lot of business development, a lot of speaking engagements. We're active in various different groups, especially in the New York, New Jersey area, but some nationwide. We don't do traditional marketing. You're not going to see us on a billboard on the side of the road. We're not doing SEO and push notifications. If you're scrolling on social media, you're not going to see interested in selling your business, interested in buying a business. You're not going to see an ad like that from us. So it's just getting our name out there, getting our brand out there. We have I'm hoping this picks up on it. We have a somewhat informal approach to our lawyering. We take our work seriously, but not ourselves too seriously. We have fun while we're doing it, and I think our clients appreciate that. So it is a different experience for a lot of our clients when they work with us. It's not a typical stuffy, scary, formal lawyer engagement, and that's very much by design. And so a lot of our clients refer us to, their colleagues, their friends, their family who are business owners. And so it works more organically. And, we're fortunate right now that with the staff we have, and everyone is phenomenal, but it frees up a lot of my time. It frees up a lot of Brian's time to, step away from the billable work and the client facing work and really get out there and do stuff like this. Like I said, speaking engagements, business development groups and whatnot.
Makes a ton of sense. It's probably the best referral point if you can have someone else just to reference. So I think it makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense just growing that network organically.
100%.
I'd be curious for fellow founders that might be listening, when should they be thinking about bringing in a lawyer? Like there's always that kind of like touch point, especially when you're bootstrapped trying to grow. Like
Yeah.
when should they call someone like yourselves up just to look over that first contract, or when should they have that point?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, the default, knee jerk response is always as soon as possible, right? But again, I'm mindful. I'm a lawyer, and I'm telling people hire a lawyer as soon as possible, right? So I'm going to assume people are going to hear that and say, "Of course, Damien would say that." Um, it is true, but there are a lot of scenarios where I'll have a conversation with founders or a couple investors who are putting some stuff together, and they were introduced to us, and I'll say, "Guys, you don't need me just yet. Don't pay me any money yet. You need to think through a few things and get it off the ground." I think there's a lot of going back to AI too. There's a lot of different resources available for people to get a startup put together, to do some really basic kind of, scaling 101 with their business, putting together kind of, their essentials that they need where they don't necessarily need a lawyer to do it for them. Maybe they need a lawyer to just quickly look at it, whatever it may be. But we're big fans of kind of shooting clients straight with that and saying, you don't need us just yet. There will be a time when we need us, and that's that. I'll say, you know, for us, and we've hired our own lawyers, right? We just moved, office space, and we had a commercial lease, and that's something that we can handle for our clients. But we said it's good to have another lawyer who's kind of completely neutral look at it. But more importantly, it's a matter of timing, right? I think for entrepreneurs, for founders, for owners, there's a moment where you feel like you could do everything, right? And I can relate to this. For the first year and a half, I was the lawyer, the owner, the marketer. I was clicking send when we had to send out our invoices. I was on the phone, collecting payment, paying a vendor, whatever it may be. At a certain point, you kind of know it when you feel it that there's an issue where you need someone who really just does this stuff, only this stuff, to come in and help you. Depending on where you are in your journey, depending on what kind of industry you're in, what kind of business you are, who's around you, right? If you have partners, you don't have partners, if you have people, you don't have people, you kind of know it when you say, I don't think we have anyone who's looking at our contracts, discussing with us legal risk implication, legal strategies, it might be time to just explore a conversation with something like that. And that's a lot of how we'll meet a lot of some of the earlier stage companies that we end up working with and oftentimes grow with is they just nothing is wrong, but they just hit that point where they say, I'm really good at selling widgets, but I'm not a lawyer. And I'm starting to think that there's probably some legal issues that are involved with selling widgets. Maybe we're selling them internationally, we're importing, we have a client dispute, we have an employee injured on the job manufacturing that widget. We don't have anyone in our corner from a legal perspective. So I hope that answers the question. There's no
Yeah,
hard and fast rule. I will say there are some, I think key moments where you absolutely want to have a lawyer on board, hiring and firing your first person, your first employee. Could be a contractor as well, but hiring and firing your first person, that's a really high risk situation, right? If you don't hire them correctly, if you don't fire them correctly, you're kind of asking for trouble. That's a no-brainer to have a lawyer involved with that type of thing. Putting together term sheets or an LOI for buying or selling a business, that's a pretty obvious one, right? Like you want to get that right. And sometimes, it makes sense to pay an attorney for a couple hours of their time to look at something to avoid them having to figure it out for 30 or 40 or 50 hours for a lot more money down the road. So you kind of do know it when you see it, but those high risk moments that I think every owner, every founder knows what they are, they can kind of feel it in their gut that I hope this goes right. Otherwise, if it doesn't go right, I don't even know what to do about this. I'm going to have to make some phone calls. Well, that's probably your time to make a phone call.
sure. I'd be curious to hear your perspective too, especially in the early days of a founder's journey of getting together, like the operating agreement and things like that. It seems like, and I've seen it in both ways, problems on when people have done the operating agreement just kind of based on templates versus going to
Yeah.
a big firm, which ironically seemingly have their own style of templates. They're just a little bit more sophisticated and well written. Like, how would you advise an early stage founder when approaching something like just the formation documents?
Take them seriously, but not too seriously. I'll explain that. Do that. All right. Well, let me back up for a second. Have them, right? The worst thing than a poorly drafted operating agreement or partnership agreement is not having one whatsoever, right? Have something in place. It doesn't need to be pretty. I've seen companies where, they were founded 6, 7 years before they came to us, and I'll say, hey, let me see your partnership agreement. And they send, what looks like, I'll hold something up here, a handwritten type of like bullet point, okay, I own 60%, you own 40%. Once a month, we'll look at how much profit we make and we'll pay each other that way. And, if you want to leave, you got to give me, this and I'll buy you out at this. And it's like, on one page, is it great? No. Has it worked for them for 6 years? Clearly. So don't overthink it, right? Have something. I think, and present company included, I think the biggest issue I sometimes see with more investors and startups is they fail to launch because they can't get out of their own way because maybe they're too focused on something like that. This might sound a little counterintuitive coming from a lawyer, but I'm also an entrepreneur, and a part of me says, for a moment, to hell with the documents. You got to get the business up and running because you might
Sure.
have a perfectly drafted operating agreement. Are focused solely on that and not on launching? What's it good for, right? You just spend some money, time, energy, whatever it is, on a beautifully drafted document, or maybe not so beautifully drafted document, but you don't have anything to apply it to. So, for example, Brian and I put something together. It was pretty scratchy in the beginning, only because we just wanted it to just get us off the ground. Like I said, there's a huge element of trust there. But then once we kind of started getting more clients, this is before we even made our first hire. We had a proven concept that our firm was actually taking off. We were doing something right. The calls were coming in, the emails were coming in, and we had a few dollars to spend. That's when we sat down and said, okay, let's make sure we do this thing right and do it once, and we'll revisit it every 4 or 5 years or wherever it is to make sure it still works for us. But now that we have a little bit of money coming in and we have a little, we're a viable concept in terms of a business, now's the time to spend on it. So I think there's different approaches to it. In some, it's important to have. You don't need to go crazy. Something is better than nothing. What you first have can always be and probably should be changed, right? When we looked at it for the first time, we both said, I can't believe this is what we did to launch this business. Now that we actually know a little something, again, we have some more money to spend on this thing. We'll make it actually like a properly drafted and nicely written partnership agreement. And that's what we did. And a lot of our clients do that, and that's perfectly fine. The one caveat to that, and then I'll stop the rant, is it really depends on the industry you're in and the business you're in. There are different, without getting too in the weeds, there are different business models out there. There are different business plans out there that will dictate how quickly and how important something like that operating agreement is. And there's no doubt it's important. The question is, how much money and attention do you have to focus, spend on it in the very beginning stages? But everyone should obviously have it. But perfect example is if you're buying a business with a group of investors to then sell it in 2, 3 years, scale it and then sell it, it's probably pretty important to have your operating agreement in pretty damn good shape from the very beginning because you're not looking at a long runway, right? Maybe in a year and a half, 2.5, 3.5 years, whatever it is, you're going to be looking to exit that business in some fashion. You don't want to be doing that while also renegotiating your partnership terms. So that's something where it might make sense to invest more time and money and focus up front to get that thing locked down, really have it negotiated, nicely protecting everyone. Everyone's aligned with what the terms are because you have a shorter runway, quite frankly. If you're going to plan to be in business and not really exit it, Brian and I started in 2019 and we don't have any plans of selling this thing or merging into a bigger firm. It wasn't as urgent, but we obviously knew it was important.
Sure. I think that's really helpful oversight. Just based on your background, I imagine you've seen a lot of different buyers and advised a lot of different business owners when looking to sell. How does it compare when that owner is looking to sell the PE versus maybe a strategic or just another individual entrepreneur that's looking to take over?
Yeah.
What does that look like? How does it compare or differ across those camps?
Yeah, really good question. So typically it's like, a competitor, PE, potentially a family member, a son or a daughter, or like a key employee, right? Those are typically the buckets of people you could sell to. Big differences in all of them. And so at a high level, first of all, the available funds that they have is a reality. I think we have to address that one first. Speaking in broad strokes, your key employee who has been your top manager for 15 years is not going to have the type of money sitting around in the bank or the access to capital, most likely, that someone in PE has, right? I think no one would disagree with that, right? I could be wrong. Maybe they come from a family with money and maybe they were fantastic at saving and investing. Who knows? But 99 out of 100 times, that person is not going to have access to capital. So that's a consideration, right? So levels of sophistication, access to funding, I think that's another one. There's always we always see a discount to the purchase price when it's being sold, I'll say internally, right, to a family member, to a son or a daughter, or to a key employee, whereas you don't really need to do that if it's to a neutral third party that isn't already in the business. Different emotional strings are attached. I'll kind of coach our clients in the lead up to their exit, depending on who is buying their company, what to maybe expect, not only in the deal process, but once the deal closes, which is always funny, right? If we're 2 months out from close and I'm representing the seller and I'm telling them what the business is potentially going to look like after they close, because there's usually a consulting period or post-closing employment. And I said, you're along for the ride. But listen, if it's your son or your daughter or your key employee, they're probably going to run it the way they think you would run it. And they're going to ask you a ton of questions because they want to take over from you and make sure like you're kind of giving them your blessing. If you sell it to a third party, PE, competitor, whatever it is, you're along for the ride and you just kind of watch your own business be run in a way that 9 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times, you're not always going to love, but hopefully the money talks and is worth you kind of, nodding your head and saying, yes, I'll keep working. Not a problem. So there's a lot of different considerations, but the level of sophistication, the access to capital, and the emotional attachments for sure. I think all these things kind of vary based on who is buying the company. And it impacts everything, right? It impacts purchase price. It impacts the negotiation process, how comfortable you are kind of pushing back on things. I've seen sellers who don't want to come across too heavy-handed negotiating with their key employee because this person has helped me build the business. So I feel like I kind of have to agree to what they want because I really want them to take it over. Whereas if I'm coming along to buy the business, they'll tell me to go to hell if they don't like the term I'm proposing, and that's perfectly okay. And just the timing of things as well. I think when you're looking at selling to a more sophisticated buyer, the timeline is a bit more aggressive. They know what they're doing. They're ready to go. Whereas sometimes when you're selling to, again, I'll bring it back to family or key employee, it ties into the level of sophistication, but they might not have their advisors lined up. You're most likely your key employee who's buying the business from you. This is probably the first time that he or she has ever bought a business. They have absolutely no clue what's going on. So they're going to ask all these dumb questions, rightfully so, because we all would in our first
Sure.
experience. And so it's a very different process. And we often find, like I said, in the lead up to that exit, we'll talk with our clients a lot about that. We'll pick up the phone and spend 30 minutes talking to them about nothing legal related, more of just kind of prepping them mentally and emotionally for what's about to happen based on our experience of who the buyer is, what category they fall into.
Gotcha. Have you seen, obviously rates are a little bit higher than they were 3 years ago. Has that impacted the M&A activity that you've seen, or is it more just organic based on the life and kind of the I guess the age of current business owners?
Yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, I don't think it's not super surprising. I think it's working within the market, and the deals are flowing. So I think it's just the deals are flowing still, and it's still very active.
Interesting. And then, I guess second to that, of like all M&A that you see, like what percentage would say rely on seller financing?
A good amount. I mean, if I had to put a number here, 80%, 75%,
It's
for
way
sure.
higher than I would have expected.
Yeah, it's a lot, and that's going to vary too, right? And maybe it does vary when I'm talking about the $3 or $4 million deal versus the 15 or $20 million deal. But in the on the lower end, it's probably up there, right? It probably goes down a little bit as we get into a bigger purchase price, but it's quite common, and that's a big thing too, right? Going back to what we were just talking about, sellers think when they sell their business, they see the purchase price and they think, "Oh, cool, that's what I'm walking away with at close." And you kind of have to explain to them if they're, a first time seller, they oftentimes are. That's not exactly, first of all, there's just something called taxes that none of us have figured out how to completely legally avoid, but they're there. But then there's set offs, there's adjustments, there's working capital issues, there's earnouts, there's different ways of structuring a deal if there's a tail period for consulting or employment post close. So all of those things kick in. Once you insert seller financing into that, you kind of like see their head explode, and you're like, all right, let me connect the dots here on how you make your money. You will make your money. It's not going to be the purchase price because that's just not how the world works. But here's how you will make your money. And seller financing, it's a common thing, especially in our deal space. Very common.
Are there any parameters that like obviously there's been a huge influx of PE moving down market over the last
Oh
five
yeah.
to 10 years. How do you advise your clients on like just trying to decide between PE offers or what to look out for or what to consider?
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, in our deal space, again, that's that lower middle market, small business type of space. The money talks, right? So it's, oftentimes if there's, I can sell to a competitor, I can sell to a key employee, or I can sell to PE. PE is going to have the most money. That's what a lot of people are focused on. Although the continuation of the business, I think, with like a key employee is meaningful. But it's a difficult conversation because I think, and I want to make sure I answer I'm understanding that question correctly. Give it to me one more time. I want to make sure I give you something that's more spot on than probably what I was going to give you.
Sure. So I guess I mean if you've got 15 to $20 million
Yeah.
enterprise offers on the table, how do you decide between different PE groups or different terms, or how do you kind of
Yeah.
compare apples to oranges?
Yeah. Yeah. So if it's within PE, that okay, thank you for that. So I want to make sure I clarify my response. If it's within PE, I'll still say what I said, which is the money talks, right? Obviously, clients are always going to be drawn to, well, this guy's willing to pay me a 7.5 multiple. This guy's willing to pay me a 9.5 multiple. What do you think is more interesting, right? So I think there's an element of that. We obviously look to the who the actual party is, right? I think this is something that always surprises sellers is that we do due diligence, or you should do due diligence on your buyer just as much as your buyer is doing it on you, right? Maybe not just as much, but you want to do something. Do they have a good track record of funding? Do they have a good track record of closing deals? Not just the group, but even like the advisors that they're working with, right? How sophisticated are their lawyers? Are they deal lawyers, or are they working with a company a firm that dabbles in transactional work? So I think that's one kind of risk factor that we look into. Again, taking off the lawyer hat, I always have conversations where I say, I think we got to get on a call. And quite frankly, I don't know that the lawyer should be on this call, where the main contacts from the PE side, for example, and my client will get on a call and just talk about what's the vision for the business, right? They don't need to blow smoke. We know what PE is looking to do. The question is at what capacity, what their timing is, and the details and all the little things in between. But I find that those types of conversations are usually very helpful because something will come up in a conversation that either interests my client and says, yeah, I think this is the right firm group for us. They're speaking my language, they understand it. Hopefully it's not all lip service, but they're telling me what I want to hear, so to speak.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, maybe not more than half, but sometimes perhaps is the better way of putting it, something will be said in that conversation that gives our clients some pause, causes them some concern that, yeah, that multiple is really nice, and I love the earnout, and I love the potential number of what I could be looking at here, but I really don't like the direction of where they're saying they want to take it. I don't like the way that sometimes they just don't like the way they got spoke to. They were spoken to in that conversation, right? They looked at me as just, get this loser owner out of here so we can come in and run this thing the way we want to run this thing. And sometimes clients pick up on that and it turns them off. We've seen deals fall apart for that too. Every deal, there's a saying out there, every deal dies twice, right? And it is true. Obviously, they don't die, but you get the sense that, you'll go home on a Friday and you'll say, I'm not sure that this thing's going to go forward. And then Monday it's back on because something happened and conversations were made and had and whatever it is. But sometimes it's just because of that gut feeling that you have, which I think is way more common and more of an issue than I think people give, right? I always say any transactional lawyer, not any lawyer, but any transactional lawyer, any M&A lawyer can get a deal closed. The question is, how efficiently can you get it closed? And is your client going to be comfortable, like you, and enjoy working with you at the end of it? And usually the way to get to that is by having these types of conversations. And that's why I always say, half the time we're acting as a lawyer, half the time we're just acting as a therapist.
Sure. Well, and I think that's pretty unusual advice just to have a almost like a fireside chat without lawyers. So I
Yeah,
appreciate you being a rare voice of reason there.
yeah, I appreciate that. It comes with the job.
Absolutely. But I mean, honestly, I think you're better off not burning all the those late hours on something that might have some structural problems. So I think
Yeah,
that's really
yeah.
wise.
Clients do appreciate it. We hear the feedback all the time. We've all been clients of other providers, whether they're service providers, whatever they are, in our personal lives, professional lives. Everyone's, they give you the answer from their, expertise, but then they kind of go beyond the answer and say, well, what about this? Think about this. And, I'll do that sometimes, and I'll connect with the client on a Friday and I'll say, don't answer these questions right now, but I want to ask you a few questions. Think about it over the weekend. Maybe talk to your spouse about it, talk to whatever it is about it, your friends, your colleagues. Let's reconnect on Monday or Tuesday when you've kind of stewed on it for a little bit and see where your head is at with this. And sometimes it's, full steam ahead. And sometimes it's, no one really asked me that question before. And it kind of shook me and maybe I'm not ready. We've had clients who think they're ready to sell and we'll have a conversation with them. Bring someone in who works with people who are gearing up for an exit on how to kind of maximize the deal value and things like that. And I'll say, yeah, Damien, I'd love to work with you now, but actually maybe let me do this for another like 2, 3 years, do some of the things that I kind of was thinking about and was hearing about. And maybe I could get a better multiple. Maybe I could increase EBITDA at that point and be in a better position to sell. And, I've lost money because I'm not doing the deal with them at that moment, but I've gained a lot of goodwill and they'll come back for that, which is the name of the game.
Well, I imagine it's paid forward in spades with all those
Yeah.
referrals and just yeah.
And it's at the end of the day, it's also the right thing, right? I mean,
Sure. Right. Exactly.
it was the right thing for that person at that moment to make that decision. They just needed someone to help them. And instead of saying, yeah, sure, we'll get your business sold, give me your money, here's how we'll do it. Sometimes we push a little bit, see what their motives are, just like you have to kind of see what the buyer's motives are. And then the seller says, let me push pause on this, right? I still want out, but I think I have some work to do before I want to get out.
Damon, I really appreciate your ethical and insightful way you guys approach this. This is
We
great.
try. We try.
Yeah.
At the very least, I want to be ethical. Ideally, a good
Yeah.
lawyer as well, but at the very least, I want to be ethical.
Certainly so. And I mean, there's a lot of sharks in the M&A space. So it's
Yeah.
nice to have a calming beach of reason. So this is great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What are the best ways people can reach out to you or get to know a little bit more about yourself or your firm?
Yeah, I mean, we pride ourselves on one of our core values as being accessible. And that's obviously not only to clients, but it's to people we know. If they have a client who needs just a quick 10-minute, gut check from us. So always happy to connect with people. Probably our website is the best area to get information on us. That's WeinsteinKlein.com, WeinsteinKlein.com. You can get my email there. It's just dweinstein@WeinsteinKlein.com. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If people want to message me on LinkedIn, I'm usually on that throughout the day, each day. So I'm pretty responsive there as well. And that's it. We don't want to be hard to find for all the reasons that are obvious, and always happy to connect with people.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your insight and just overview today on both just
Thank you.
AI, labor, and Hey, this has
Yeah,
been a
some good
really cool
stuff.
conversation.
We took some turns, which I like.
Yeah,
It wasn't the typical trajectory. I like that we bounced around a little bit. I think that's cool.
absolutely. Well, appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right. Be well.